What's happening to Black women in the federal government right now is an example of how a workplace policy can appear to seem neutral, but can disproportionately impact one group more so than others. In my field, industrial organizational psychology, we do not call this DEI, we call this adverse impact, and we have an equation for it. Back in 1978, 4 government agencies collaborated to define fair hiring practices, and they made this, the Uniform Guidelines on Employee Selection Procedures. In my field, this is like part of our code of conduct. One of the major takeaways from this code of conduct is adverse impact. To not design workplace tools and systems that adversely impact one group over others, even if that's not the intent. To be clear, I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice. There are legal implications to breaking this rule. I'll tell you what those are, but still consult with an attorney. Adverse impact is also called the 4/5 rule, where whichever group you're hiring the most is called the dominant group. Any other group that you are hiring at less than 80% of the dominant group, that is considered adverse impact. So here's the example. Let's say there's 100 men and women in each applicant pool, which it's never that even, right? Not such perfect numbers. But if you hire 50 men and only 30 women, the ratios dividing 30% by 50%, which say that women are being hired at 60%. That is less than 80%. That is adverse impact. In this case, the burden is put on the employer to have to justify why they are using selection systems that have an adverse impact on one group. It doesn't automatically mean they're in trouble, but they have to prove, one, that what they're hiring based on is job related. This is why I always encourage people to articulate what skills are needed for the job, both soft skills and hard skills. Because of this, if challenged, you have to be able to prove you are hiring for the job, it's a business necessity, and that there's no alternative way that would reduce the adverse impact. As someone in my field who has been trained on this and has been expected to uphold this code of conduct, I was curious of what is happening with Black women right now, if that meets the adverse impact requirement. A little bit of a problem here though. This data in the federal government is getting harder to find according to the marketplace. A researcher at the Pew Research Center who made a report last September was able to pull from the FedScope database all the diversity data. In March of this year, he went in and it was gone. So I don't know what the numbers are right now, and you really can't convince me that's not intentional. But I do think this deserves to be followed up on. It's a bit tricky to calculate this because without the data being publicly available, we have to make some assumptions, so that is a limitation. Reports show that 318,000 Black women have been forced out of the workforce. We do not know how many of those are federal. They could also be contractors, which could be due to federal stuff, but it could also be layoffs from AI. Why am I still doing this with such a big flaw? Because if you're in human resources or you're in a workplace and you're noticing this is happening, I want you to know that this is maybe an option for you to pursue. So lawyers have claimed that 80% of staff being fired from the federal government are people who are people of color and non-binary folks, but most of them are Black women. So let's just go off most and so let's say 60% are Black women. Again, that's a big limitation. I just want you to know how to do this calculation. So according to 2021 EEOC data, Black women make up 12.1% of the workforce. That is about 290,000 people out of 2.4 million. Okay, let's say there's 60%. That means 14,000 Black women were fired as opposed to 4,600 total cuts of white people. If 80% were all POC and non-binary. So it also gets murky because non-binary people can be white. So let's just say like cis white people here, 20%. That would make the layoff rate for Black women 4.8% and the layoff rate for white cis people, not just women, white cis people, 0.33%. So you would divide that impact ratio by 0.33 divided by 4.8, and that's 6.9%, roughly 7%. The criteria for adverse impact is it has to be 80%. So that's pretty severe adverse impact. I just want you to know how to do this. We're seeing this in the headlines. This is a problem. When Black women start disappearing, that is the first canary in the coal mine, y'all. You don't get labor rights by taking away labor rights from other people. It has never worked that way. So if you're in a workplace and you're wondering, where'd all the Black women go? Maybe run this calculation and see what that looks like.